breaking news that we have for you is that, to the surprise of many, including, I'll be honest, myself, the Supreme Court has denied Donald Trump's bid to stay his criminal sentence. He is scheduled to be sentenced tomorrow to no jail time, but as of tomorrow, he will officially be sentenced for the 34-count felony conviction in New York. The Supreme Court asked and answered. They have said no to Donald Trump's bid to stay his sentencing. Ladies first, let me go to you, Lisa Rubin, your reaction to that.
Well, Joy, like you, I'm somewhat surprised, not because I thought that the Supreme Court's presidential immunity decision should have justified a stay here, but because I thought Donald Trump ultimately would have enough votes to go for the stay. Instead, he lost narrowly by a vote of 5-4. And critically, Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Amy Coney Barrett voting with the 3 liberals to deny Donald Trump that stay of sentencing that he sought.
All right, folks, Jack Mockler, where honest talk lives. Over just a few days, federal judges, including some Trump appointees, have delivered devastating rulings that not only block his policies, but document dishonesty and constitutional violations in official court records. Legal experts call it unprecedented, a systematic judicial takedown exposing a pattern of deception that has left Trump's legal and political standing in ruins. Let me take you inside the courtroom where the most damaging of these defeats unfolded. On November 6th, federal judge Sarah Ellis was presiding over a case involving Trump's top immigration commander, an official who had been directing federal operations in Chicago and other cities.
I want to read to you and our viewers the one paragraph that the majority of 5 justices wrote, because I think it's really telling the reasons why they denied the stay. They say, first, the alleged evidentiary violations at President-elect Trump's state court trial can be addressed in the ordinary course on appeal, meaning he can be sentenced and he can still pursue an appeal. And the New York state court system, he doesn't lose that right by virtue of being sentenced. In fact, it's because, and as a result of the sentencing being final, that he would have appellate rights to begin with. And then they go on to say, second, the burden that sentencing will impose on the president-elect's responsibilities is relatively insubstantial in light of the trial court's stated intent to impose a sentence of unconditional discharge after a brief virtual hearing. In other words, the burdens here on him are negligible because the trial court judge, Juan Merchan, has already said in an opinion that he intends to sentence Donald Trump to unconditional discharge.
The case involved allegations that the administration had been violating the rights of journalists and protesters through aggressive enforcement tactics that went far beyond what the law allowed. During the proceedings, the commander was required to give a deposition, to answer questions under oath about his actions, the justifications for the policies he was implementing, and the factual basis for the claims the administration was making to the court. And according to court transcripts and legal commentary that has since been widely analyzed, the commander lied repeatedly. He made false statements about police violence in Chicago. He misrepresented the use of force incidents that had occurred. He claimed that certain events had not happened when evidence showed they clearly had.
Which means no penalty whatsoever. No jail time, no probation, no fine, not even community service as far as I understand it. What the sentencing then does is it's twofold. One, it finalizes the conviction and it makes Donald Trump officially the one thing that he has not yet been, a convicted felon. And it will make him a convicted felon when he takes office on January 20th. But the second thing it will do is force him, at least virtually, that is, because Juan Merchan has given him the option not to show up in person, it will force him to stand before the court and have the judge explain the rationale for his sentence and why he thought it was imperative that Donald Trump be sentenced, given the gravity of the crimes. He outlined this to some extent in the opinion that he wrote on January 3rd, denying the last of Trump's motions to try and avoid this indictment and to vacate the verdict. But he's going to have an opportunity to say his piece in open court.
He was caught in a web of deception that unraveled when lawyers for the journalists and protesters presented documentary evidence that directly contradicted everything he had said. Judge Ellis's reaction was immediate and furious. She confronted the commander directly and her words, now part of the permanent court record, are devastating. She said, and I'm quoting directly from the transcript, "It is not a small matter when you lie in a deposition, especially if you are in command of major federal operations." That is a federal judge essentially saying to a senior administration official, "I know you committed perjury. I have the evidence to prove it. And because you hold a position of significant authority, your lies are even more serious than they would be coming from an ordinary person."
At Donald Trump, at least on a computer screen, and make it clear to everyone present and the historical record why it is that we're all sitting there, Joy.
Extraordinary stuff. Paul Butler, are you as surprised as I am?
It's a shame that we have to be surprised when the Supreme Court actually abides by the rule of law. But yes, I am surprised. Last year, Donald Trump was convicted of 34 felonies. That was 7 months ago. Any other criminal defendant would have been sentenced a long time ago. So now Donald Trump will finally receive his just desserts. Now it's unconditional relief, which is a gift from the judge to Donald Trump. It basically, he gets his finger wagged at in court. And I think that the judge will have a lot to say to Donald Trump tomorrow virtually, since Donald Trump doesn't have to be there in person, that Donald Trump will not like hearing, but then it will be game over. He will go on to be president of the United States. You know, last year, Donald Trump said, or actually earlier, last year, Donald Trump said that the sentencing needed to happen after the election, and the judge went along with that. But now Trump was saying
the implications of that statement are staggering because perjury, lying under oath, is one of the most serious offenses you can commit in the legal system. It undermines the entire judicial process. If witnesses can lie without consequences, if officials can make false representations to courts and get away with it, then trials become meaningless, the rule of law becomes a joke, and the entire system of justice collapses. Judge Ellis didn't stop at confronting the commander about his lies. She took the extraordinary step of issuing injunctions that blocked the official from continuing the very operations that had been based on those false statements. She effectively said to the administration
that the sentencing should wait either 4 years until his administration's over or never happen. And apparently for at least 6 members of the Supreme Court, that was a bridge too far.
And I'm shocked that John Roberts, I'm just going to be honest, one of his appointees, Amy Coney Barrett, went along with the liberals on the court. No surprise about Alito, who was just chatting with Trump on the phone about a job for one of his former clerks. And his moral compass is very clear. But John Roberts strikes me as somebody who's made it his mission to protect Donald Trump, to protect his feelings, to protect his ability to act boldly, as he said in his ruling that Donald Trump has absolute immunity and he can commit any crime he wants. So I am shocked, and not because I thought there was any merit to Donald Trump's argument, but like Lisa Rubin, I just assumed John Roberts is there to protect Trump at all costs.
And I think that's absolutely right.
But it's a reasonable assumption. That's right.
And there's a tension between Roberts' fealty to Donald Trump and
100%.
His fealty to the legitimacy of the court.
100%. And the thing is, I specifically want to talk to you about is that
since you have proven that you cannot be trusted to tell the truth, you no longer get to exercise these powers. The injunctions were not temporary. They were not pending appeal. They were immediate, and they were sweeping. They shut down enforcement operations that the administration had spent months building. They protected journalists and protesters from the kind of aggressive tactics that had been used against them. And they did so because the judge concluded that the administration's dishonesty made it impossible for her to trust anything they said about the justification for their actions. It was a direct and devastating consequence of getting caught in a lie, and it sent a message to every other official in the administration that the courts were watching, that they were paying attention, and that there would be consequences for dishonesty. But that was only the beginning. In a separate but related case, Judge Karen Immergut delivered an even more devastating blow to Trump's agenda. She issued a permanent ban on Trump deploying National Guard troops to Portland, a policy that the administration had been pursuing for months, despite repeated warnings from the courts that it was unconstitutional. And her reasoning, laid out in a scathing written opinion that has been analyzed by legal experts across the country, is remarkable in its clarity and its forcefulness. Judge Immergut found that Trump had violated federal law. She found that he had violated the 10th Amendment, which reserves certain powers to the states and prevents the federal government from overreaching into areas that are properly the domain of state authority. She explained in detail that the president does not have unilateral authority to deploy National Guard troops to a city against the wishes of state authorities, that doing so is a violation of federalism, a violation of state sovereignty, and an unconstitutional overreach of executive power. But what makes Judge Immergut's ruling even more damaging for Trump is her finding that the administration had been misleading the court about the justification for these deployments. According to reporting from Al Jazeera and legal analysts who have reviewed the decision, the judge found that Trump's team had made false claims about the existence of an emergency that required federal intervention. They had claimed that state authorities couldn't handle the situation, but the judge found that state and local law enforcement were managing things just fine. Every justification that Trump's lawyers had offered was exposed as false. Every legal argument was rejected. And the judge made all of this explicit in her written opinion, documenting the pattern of dishonesty that had characterized the administration's approach to the case. It's not just a defeat, it's a humiliation. A public exposure of lies and misconduct that will follow Trump and his team for the rest of their careers. The language Judge Immergut used in her opinion is unusually harsh for a federal judge. She doesn't just say Trump was wrong. She says he willfully violated the law, that he knew his actions were unconstitutional and did them anyway, that his administration misled the court about the facts and the law, and that a permanent injunction is necessary because Trump has proven he can't be trusted to respect constitutional limits without court supervision. That's about as harsh as judicial language gets. It goes beyond legal reasoning into moral condemnation, a statement that the conduct was not just illegal, but egregious, intentional, and contemptuous of the rule of law. And it all goes into the permanent record as findings of fact and conclusions of law. This isn't an accusation from a political opponent. This isn't commentary from a cable news host. This is a federal judge, an impartial arbiter of justice, making formal findings about presidential misconduct that will be cited in future cases and referenced in the historical record. The pattern of judicial defeat that Trump is experiencing is not limited to these two rulings. According to Bloomberg reporting from September, Trump has suffered hundreds of legal defeats in 2025 alone. Hundreds of cases where his policies were blocked, his executive orders enjoined, his officials sanctioned, his arguments rejected. The pattern is consistent across different types of cases and different levels of courts. Trial courts are ruling against Trump. Appellate courts are ruling against Trump. Even the Supreme Court has ruled against him on several major issues. And the common thread throughout all of these defeats is dishonesty. Judges at every level keep catching Trump and his team making false representations, hiding evidence, making arguments that are contradicted by the facts. And once you develop that reputation with the judiciary, once judges expect you to be dishonest, you can't win anymore. Your arguments get rejected automatically. Your evidence gets questioned aggressively. Your lawyers get sanctioned for making false statements. You become, in the eyes of the court, a party that cannot be trusted, and that makes it nearly impossible to prevail in litigation. What makes these defeats even more remarkable is that some of the harshest rulings are coming from judges Trump appointed. Judges who owe their positions to him, who might be expected to give him the benefit of the doubt, who might be sympathetic to his legal theories and his political agenda. Even those judges are ruling against him. They are calling out his lies and his constitutional violations. They are issuing injunctions that block his policies permanently. Because the evidence is so overwhelming, because Trump's behavior is so egregious, because the pattern of dishonesty is so clear, that even judges who might want to rule in his favor cannot do it. They cannot ignore the facts. They cannot overlook the lies. They cannot pretend that constitutional violations are acceptable simply because they come from a president who appointed them to the bench. The rule of law means that the law applies to everyone, even to the president, even to the people who appointed the judges. And these judges are demonstrating that principle in the most powerful way possible. The legal commentators analyzing these cases are noting something else that is deeply significant. The judges aren't just ruling against Trump quietly. They are being public about it. They are writing detailed opinions that document exactly how Trump lied. They are calling out specific false statements and the evidence that proves they were false. They are including language in their rulings that goes well beyond what is necessary to decide the cases, language that condemns the administration's conduct, that warns other officials about the consequences of dishonesty, that establishes a record of misconduct that can be used in future proceedings. And in some cases, retired federal judges are even speaking to the media or writing op-eds about their concerns. Active judges are issuing unusually harsh language in their opinions. The entire federal judiciary seems to be sending a message. We see what you're doing, we won't tolerate it, and we're going to call it out publicly. This is having real-world consequences for Trump's ability to govern. When courts block your policies, when they issue injunctions against your actions, when they expose your lies, you can't implement your agenda. Trump wants to crack down on immigration. Courts block it. He wants to deploy federal forces to cities. Courts ban it. He wants to withhold funding from programs. Courts order him to pay. He wants to use the powers of the presidency in ways that stretch the boundaries of the Constitution. Courts shut him down. At every turn, the judiciary is constraining his power, limiting his authority, forcing him to operate within constitutional bounds that he would rather ignore. And his ability to do what he wants is being severely restricted because judges don't trust him, don't believe his justifications, don't accept his legal arguments. They've seen too many examples of dishonesty to give him the benefit of the doubt anymore. The political implications of these judicial defeats are just as significant as the legal implications. These court rulings are now part of the permanent record, documented evidence that Trump and his team have lied under oath, violated the Constitution, and engaged in a pattern of misconduct that goes far beyond normal political disagreements. That gives impeachment advocates ammunition. It gives Trump's opponents in Congress specific findings of fact that they can point to when they argue for accountability. It makes it much harder for Trump's defenders to claim that this is all a partisan witch hunt because these rulings come from federal judges, including Trump appointees, making formal findings about misconduct. You can't call it a witch hunt when judges are catching you in lies under oath, when they're documenting your constitutional violations, when they're issuing permanent injunctions against your policies. That's not persecution. That's accountability, and Trump is on the receiving end of it in the most devastating way possible. The connection between these court rulings and broader discussions about Trump's fitness for office is direct and obvious. What the judges are documenting is not just legal errors, but a fundamental character flaw. They are showing that Trump cannot be trusted to tell the truth, cannot be trusted to respect the law, cannot be trusted to operate within constitutional limits. And those are exactly the kinds of questions that voters and lawmakers should be considering when they evaluate whether someone should hold the most powerful office in the world. The pattern of dishonesty that the courts have exposed is not a minor issue. It goes to the heart of whether Trump is fit to be president, whether he can be trusted with the immense power that the office confers, whether the country can rely on him to act in accordance with the law and the Constitution. And the courts are providing evidence on that question that is overwhelming and damning. The long-term consequences of these judicial defeats are going to extend far beyond the immediate cases and policies. These court rulings are permanent parts of the legal record. Future cases will cite them. Future judges will reference them. And if Trump or anyone associated with him tries to argue in court in the future, opposing lawyers will point to these rulings and say, "Remember when judges caught this team lying? Remember when they documented constitutional violations? Remember the pattern of dishonesty?" That destroys credibility permanently. It makes it nearly impossible to win cases going forward because judges will always be skeptical, always question your representations, always demand extra proof. And that's a huge disadvantage in litigation. It means that even when Trump has a legitimate legal argument, even when he's actually in the right on the merits, he's going to have a harder time convincing judges because they've been burned too many times by his dishonesty. The boy who cried wolf has been caught lying too often, and now nobody believes him even when he's telling the truth. There's also the impact on Trump's legal team. Good lawyers don't want to represent clients who lie to them and ask them to make false representations to courts. That puts the lawyer's own license and reputation at risk. It exposes them to sanctions and disbarment. It can even lead to criminal charges. So the best lawyers won't work for Trump. They won't take his cases. They won't put their careers on the line to defend someone who can't be trusted to tell the truth. Trump is stuck with second-tier attorneys who are willing to sacrifice their credibility to defend him. And that creates a vicious cycle where worse lawyers mean more losses, and more losses mean even fewer good lawyers willing to take his cases. The quality of his legal representation keeps declining, and the results in court keep getting worse. It's a death spiral that is accelerating as more and more judges expose the dishonesty and impose sanctions on the lawyers who participate in it. The pattern that emerges from all of these rulings is clear. Trump built his career on bluffing, on making bold claims whether they're true or not, on overwhelming opponents with aggressive tactics. In business, maybe that works. You can bluff, make false claims, settle cases before the truth comes out. But in federal court, that doesn't work, because judges have the power to compel truthful testimony, to demand evidence, to expose lies. And once they catch you lying, they don't forget. Your credibility is destroyed, and every future case becomes harder. Trump either doesn't understand that or doesn't care, because he keeps using the same tactics even though they're not working. His lawyers keep making false representations to courts. His officials keep lying under oath, and judges keep catching them and sanctioning them and documenting it in official rulings. It's a pattern of behavior that's self-destructive that guarantees Trump will keep losing in court. But he can't seem to stop, can't seem to adjust his approach, and that's costing him dearly in both legal and political terms. Let's think through what happens next. First, more court defeats are coming. Trump's legal strategy hasn't changed. His team is still using the same tactics, still lying, still making false arguments, still trying to mislead judges. And now that the judiciary is onto them, now that judges expect dishonesty from Trump's team, every future case is going to be an uphill battle. Judges will scrutinize everything more carefully. They'll demand more evidence. They'll be quicker to sanction lawyers who make false representations. And Trump will keep losing. Second, there could be criminal referrals for perjury. When a judge catches someone lying under oath, they can refer that matter to prosecutors. And Judge Ellis's findings about Trump's immigration commander, that he repeatedly lied in his deposition, that's the kind of thing that could lead to criminal charges. Now, whether prosecutors actually pursue those charges is another question, but the legal exposure is real, and it adds to the mounting legal jeopardy facing Trump and his team. Third, Trump's ability to implement his agenda gets severely constrained. Every policy he wants to push gets challenged in court. And because judges don't trust him, because he's lost all credibility, those challenges succeed. His policies get blocked. His executive orders get enjoined. His actions get scrutinized aggressively. And he can't govern effectively because the judiciary is constantly checking him, constantly limiting his power, constantly forcing him to operate within constitutional bounds that he'd rather ignore. Fourth, the political damage compounds. Every court ruling that exposes Trump's lies becomes a news story, becomes a talking point for his opponents, becomes evidence in the impeachment debate. And over time, that accumulates. Each individual ruling might not be devastating on its own, but hundreds of rulings, all documenting dishonesty and constitutional violations, paints a picture that shapes public opinion, that influences how voters view Trump and whether they think he should remain in office. The judiciary has reached its breaking point with Trump. They've been patient. They've given him multiple chances. They've allowed his lawyers to correct their submissions. They've overlooked some false statements when they were minor, but the pattern has continued. It has escalated. And now judges are responding with the most powerful tools available to them, They're issuing sanctions, they're making criminal referrals, they're writing opinions that document the dishonesty in language that leaves no room for interpretation. They're sending a clear message that the behavior will not be tolerated, that there are consequences for lying to federal judges, that no one, not even the president, is above the law. And Trump is feeling those consequences in the most devastating way possible, losing case after case, seeing his policies blocked, watching his credibility destroyed, and facing the real possibility of criminal liability for the lies that his team has told. So here's the bottom line. Federal judges delivered massive defeats to Trump over this period. They systematically dismantled his false claims. They caught his officials lying under oath. They exposed his constitutional violations. They issued permanent injunctions blocking his policies. These rulings come from judges at every level, including Trump appointees, showing how overwhelming the evidence against him is. Trump has suffered hundreds of legal defeats in the year alone, and the pattern is clear: dishonesty. Courts keep catching him and his team lying, and once you lose credibility with the judiciary, you can't win anymore. This is devastating politically. It gives impeachment advocates ammunition, it undermines Trump's ability to govern, and it documents his lawlessness in official court records that will follow him forever. The judiciary has had enough. They're publicly calling out Trump's lies. They're constraining his power. They're enforcing constitutional limits aggressively. And Trump keeps losing. He can't adjust his tactics, can't stop lying, can't operate within legal boundaries. And as a result, the courts are destroying him. One ruling at a time, one exposed lie at a time. This is what accountability looks like. This is the legal system working. And Trump is on the wrong end of it. The question now is whether the political system will catch up with the legal system, whether Congress will act on the evidence that the courts have documented, whether Trump will face the full consequences of his dishonesty and lawlessness. The courts have done their part. Now it's up to the rest of the system to respond.